On the 2nd of October 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, a US-based journalist and critic of Saudi Arabia's government, walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and never came out. In the months that followed, conflicting narratives emerged over how he died and who was responsible. But the craziest part of this story was an audio clip that recorded the last moments of Jamal Khashoggi, and what was heard in that clip will send shivers to your very core. No one deserves to die that way.
Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi.
Jamal Khashoggi was a well-known Saudi reporter. He wrote about major stories like the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the rise of the late Osama bin Laden as the leader of Al-Qaeda for several Saudi news outlets. He was certainly a man who lived his life at the center of a whirlwind. In the 1980s, when Khashoggi was a young adult, he joined the Mujahideen, a group of Islamist rebels backed by Saudi Arabia that fought against Soviet forces in Afghanistan. That's one of the ways he became friends with Osama bin Laden. Khashoggi at first agreed with Al-Qaeda's goal of overthrowing dictatorships that ravaged the Middle East. You see, most Arab leaders were in power for a long time and were ruthless, and Khashoggi hated that. But as his views grew more liberal, he spoke out against the group's crimes and championed for democracy, which saw him cut ties with the terrorist group. His portfolio alone as a journalist should get him a free meal and drink for the rest of his life. And in a way, that's what happened. After the war, he went back to Saudi Arabia. By that time, he had a reputation of being such a courageous writer that even the Saudi royal family loved him. For decades, the 59-year-old was close to the Saudi royal family and also served as an advisor to the government. But the relationship started showing signs of problems. For starters, in 2007, he ran the pro-government newspaper at Al Watan, but after 3 years, he was fired for pushing the boundaries of debate within Saudi society, quote unquote. But that didn't stop him, as he continued his criticism of the Saudi government, especially in matters of human rights. Then, in 2011, Khashoggi spoke out against what he saw as the harsh and dictatorial Saudi government after being inspired by the events of the Arab Spring, where there were massive protests all over the Middle East against dictatorship ravaging the Middle East. This protest and continuous comments from Khashoggi only made the government angry, so they made things hard for him with hints of assassinations if he didn't stop. In 2017, he left his country on a self-exile and went to live in America alone, and his wife was forced to divorce him. However, despite being miles away from his country, Khashoggi never stopped criticizing the Saudi government. In the US, Khashoggi became a contributor for the Washington Post, and from there, he had a monthly piece where he wrote and criticized Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's policies, as well as the entire government. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is the son of King Salman and is the leader of Saudi Arabia. In his first piece for the Post, which came out in September 2017, Khashoggi said he was afraid of being arrested because the prince seemed to be cracking down on dissent, but that wouldn't stop him from speaking the truth. This only made Mohammed bin Salman and his cohorts angry. You see, Mohammed bin Salman had this profile he was trying to build. He was admired by many in the West as he was seen as a reformer and modernizer with a new vision for his country. Those archaic laws that sat on women's rights were gradually removed. So for that, a lot of countries liked him, but those who know or who lived in Saudi Arabia had a different version of events. You see, yes, there were a lot of changes, but there were still issues here and there, especially when it came to human rights. You just didn't hear about it much because the media heavily suppressed the news. And here was this man, telling his dirty and inhumane secrets to the whole world, destroying his reputation on some of the biggest platforms in the world.
That is what I'm fearful of. It is becoming a one-man rule. He has a control on everything. He is creating an environment of intimidation and fear. Saudis are being silenced. Things are not being transparent. And that is not a good recipe for reform in Saudi Arabia. And he needs to do something about that.
Something had to be done to shut this man up from spilling more secrets. The Crown Prince just had to wait for a moment to strike. And that moment presented itself on October 2nd. Khashoggi had not only moved on from his previous life in Saudi Arabia, but he was starting one with a beautiful woman who he was engaged to. But they couldn't get married until Khashoggi could provide a divorce paper. Obviously, he couldn't travel to Saudi Arabia for that. He'd be arrested on sight. Khashoggi first went to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on September 28, 2018, to get a Saudi paper saying he was divorced so he could marry Hatice Cengiz, a Turkish woman he was engaged to. On the day of his first visit to the consulate, Hatice had to remain outside. She remembers Khashoggi coming out of the building with a smile on his face. He told her that officials had been surprised to see him and had offered him tea and coffee. He said there was nothing to be afraid of, she says. He missed his country so much, and breathing that familiar air had made him feel really good. If only he knew. Khashoggi was told to come back in a few days. What Khashoggi didn't know was that as soon as he left that day smiling, a series of phone calls were made to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, telling them of how their most wanted just casually strolled into the embassy. The information went up the chain of command and finally got to this man, Saud al-Qahtani. Saud al-Qahtani is a powerful aide who ran the Crown Prince's so-called communications office and is said to be the one who quickly gathered a team and executed the mission, the brain behind the operation. Al-Qahtani already has a reputation for holding and torturing Saudi dissidents, including female activists who tried to drive before the ban was lifted and high-profile individuals suspected of disloyalty. In such, Khashoggi had written in one of his posts that Al-Qahtani was operating a blacklist, quote-unquote, for the Crown Prince. Anyone who so much blinked in a way the Crown Prince didn't like was on that list. That became part of his portfolio, and he managed it with a particular ruthlessness. In a later investigation, it was found that the consulate and Riyadh had at least 4 phone calls on September 28th, the day Khashoggi visited the consulate. There were talks between the Consul General and the head of security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This would be when they told the Consul General to contact Khashoggi to schedule an appointment for October 2nd. Even Khashoggi was surprised to get a call back that quickly. He thought he'd have to wait a while. But then again, he probably thought that his reputation and how good the interview went also played a factor. In the afternoon of October 1st, 3 Saudi intelligence officers landed in Istanbul, most likely to do a quick recon of the place before the main squad arrived. Early in the morning on October 2nd, a private jet touched down at Istanbul airport. There were 9 Saudis on board. One of them was Dr. Salah al-Tabaigi, a forensic pathologist. I'll get to why he's important in a minute. At that time, they probably didn't look suspicious, but now I and a lot of people can confirm that this was the hit squad that was sent. The Saudis checked into the large and impersonal Movenpick Hotel, located within a few minutes' walk of the consulate. 5 minutes before 10 a.m. on October 2nd, CCTV captures one of the hit squad entering the Saudi consulate. From the looks of it, this man here was the one who ran the operation on the ground. And he's not just any man who takes orders. Mahir Abdulaziz Matrib, which is his name, is the personal bodyguard of the Crown Prince, MBS. He has been seen on multiple occasions traveling with the Crown Prince as part of the security detail. So seeing him here indirectly means that this was an order given from the top. By the time the arrivals had settled in, Turkish employees of the consulate were taking advantage of a surprise afternoon off. They'd been sent home before noon after being told by Saudi bosses that an important diplomatic delegation was arriving for a meeting. Anyone who was still around was a loyalist. Later in the morning of the same day, Khashoggi received a call to come to the consulate for his documents. On October 2nd, Miss Cengiz walked with him to the consulate's front door. On CCTV video, he was last seen coming into the building at 1:14 local time, while Hatice Cengiz waited outside the consulate to meet with him after his interview. He even told his friends that he wouldn't have any problems inside, but he still gave Ms. Cengiz 2 cell phones and gave her a number to call if he didn't come back out. And with that advice, Jamal walked in. I've scoured the internet for days, trying to find the audio file of the last moments of Jamal Khashoggi. I didn't want to take anything from the dreadful feeling he must have felt during his last moments, but the only thing I could find was the transcripts. It might not be the same, but I hope it passes the notion of how cruel his killers were. Let's start before Khashoggi entered the consulate. This is the audio transcripts between these 2 men, Mahir Abdulaziz Matrib and Dr. Salah Mohammed Al-Tabaigi. Matrib: is it possible to put the body in a bag? Al-Tabaigi: no, too heavy, very tall too. Actually, I've always worked on cadavers. I know how to cut very well. I have never worked on a warm body though, but I'll also manage that easily. I normally put on my earphones and listen to music when I cut cadavers. In the meantime, I sip on my coffee and smoke. After I dismember it, you will wrap the parts in plastic bags, put them in suitcases, and take them out. Then Al-Tabaigi continues with, my superior at the forensic evidence does not know what I'm doing. There is no one to protect me. This was said in an effort to ask for protection in case things went sideways, or it could even be as a way of saying, you can count on me, so promote me to a position that doesn't require prying eyes. It turns out that this was a premeditated plan to not only kill Khashoggi, but to cut him up into pieces. And that was the role Dr. Salah Mohammed Al-Tabaigi was going to play. As soon as Khashoggi walks into the Saudi embassy, he's greeted by a familiar face. His tone from the recording shows that he knew who it was. He is then told that the Consul General Mohammed Al-Otaibi is around. Then he's kindly asked to come into the consul's office on the 2nd floor. Khashoggi knew something was wrong in his gut. He starts to get suspicious, but before he could do anything, he's pulled by the arm by a security detail into the room. Khashoggi enters the room, and in front of him is Matrib. Matrib tells Khashoggi to sit down. This is the transcript of the audio file. Matrib, please sit. We have to take you back to Riyadh. There is an order from Interpol. Interpol demanded you be returned. We are here to take you. Khashoggi, there are no lawsuits against me. My fiancée is waiting outside for me. During these conversations, another unidentified hit squad member, probably portraying the bad cop during the interrogation, repeatedly tells Khashoggi to cut it short, quote unquote. Matrib, do you have any mobile phones on you? Khashoggi, I have 2 mobile phones. Matrib, which brand? Khashoggi, iPhone. And what happens next is so scary. Matrib, leave a message for your son. Khashoggi, what should I tell my son? Matrib, you will write a message. Let's rehearse. Show it to us. Khashoggi, what should I say? See you soon? Unidentified hit squad member says, cut it short. Matrib, you will write something like, I'm in Istanbul. Don't worry if you cannot reach me. Khashoggi, I shouldn't say kidnapped? Unidentified hit squad member says, take your jacket off. Khashoggi, how can such a thing take place at a consulate? I'm not writing anything. Unidentified hit squad member says, cut it short. Khashoggi, I'm not writing anything. Matrib, write it, Mr. Jamal. Hurry up. Help us so we can help you. Because in the end, we will take you back to Saudi Arabia, and if you don't help us, you know what will happen eventually. Khashoggi, there is a towel here. Will you have me drugged? Al-Tabaigi, we will put you to sleep. After he was drugged, Khashoggi says, do not keep my mouth closed, before losing his consciousness. I have asthma. Do not do it. You will suffocate me. These were Khashoggi's last words. After this, his killers put a plastic bag over his head so Khashoggi would die of suffocation. The records then mostly show people scuffling and fighting, with some questions and orders from the hit squad heard here and there. Is he asleep? He's raising his head. Keep pushing push it well, etc. Sounds of scuffling and choking can be heard for a while before Khashoggi finally takes his last breath. Then the terrifying post-mortem part starts, which includes the horrifying sounds of Khashoggi's body being cut up into smaller pieces. 3 guys walk in with bags and suitcases, which I think is where they put Khashoggi's body. Around 3 p.m, CCTV shows vehicles from the consulate leaving and arriving at the home of the Consul General, which is 2 streets away. After that, a car drives off and the body of Khashoggi is never found. Now here is where things get just diabolical. CCTV caught 2 of the hitmen leaving the consulate at 3:53 p.m. Analysts were able to retrace their steps back down the street past the cameras that showed their route between the consulate and the heart of old Istanbul. And that's where they saw one man dressed like Khashoggi, probably done this way to fabricate a claim that Khashoggi left the consulate and whatever bad thing that happened to him happened outside the consulate. The other guy has a hoodie over his face and is carrying a white plastic bag. They call a cab to their hotel and put the plastic bag that is thought to contain Khashoggi's clothes in a nearby trash can. They then take the subway back to Movenpick Hotel. Meanwhile, Khashoggi's fiancée, Cengiz, was outside all this while, not knowing that her soon-to-be husband was already dead and cut to pieces. When I was covering his story, it was really disturbing to me that something like this could happen in a consulate in a foreign country in broad daylight with his fiancée outside and without any care. I don't know, it was really sickening. By now, the time was 3:30 p.m. and Cengiz had not seen Khashoggi. She was starting to worry. She ran towards the consulate and realized it was closed. She asked the security guard why Khashoggi didn't come out, and the guard told her he didn't know what she was talking about. At 4:41 p.m, Cengiz was desperate and phoned the number Khashoggi gave her earlier in case something went wrong. The person who picked up the call was Dr. Yasin Aktay. Dr. Yasin Aktay is a member of Turkey's ruling party with contacts at the highest levels. He was also an advisor to the President of Turkey. According to him, and this is the quote, "I received a call from an unknown number, a really worried voice from a lady I didn't know. She said, my fiancé Jamal Khashoggi went into the Saudi consulate and didn't come out."
Good for me. They said me, they're animals. They are animals. They are worse than animals. They killed him like dogs, and he was crying, and I.
Yasin quickly called the head of Turkish intelligence and alerted President Tayyip Erdogan's office about what was going on. You see, Khashoggi and Erdogan were kind of friends. They had similar views on the role of political Islam in society. He knew that Khashoggi was planning to move to Istanbul and establish a TV station in the country. Khashoggi desired a fresh start nearer to his family, his kids, and a new spouse. He intended to continue writing columns for the Washington Post, retaining the same presence and platform that had displeased the Crown Prince, but from a more comfortable position. When President Erdogan was told of Khashoggi's disappearance, he became enraged. He told his ministers to summon the Saudis and make them share some of what they knew. But by 8:30 p.m, the members of the hit squad were already on a private jet back to Riyadh less than 24 hours after they had arrived. News started to get out that a beloved reporter was missing on a consulate ground. First of all, that was an absurd statement. The consulate should have been the last place anything bad should happen because of the level of security. The very next day, the Saudi and Turkish governments released different, contradictory reports about what happened inside the consulate. Saudi Arabia said Khashoggi had already left the consulate, while the Turks said he was still inside. By now, the whole world was in a frenzy, trying to figure out how to find Jamal Khashoggi. All fingers were pointing to Saudi Arabia for foul play. I mean, Jamal was seen as an enemy for the radical things he said about Mohammed bin Salman, and it stands to reason that maybe they had a hand in his disappearance. But for more than 2 weeks, Saudi Arabia consistently denied any knowledge of Khashoggi's fate. Prince Mohammed told several news outlets that the journalist had left the consulate after a few minutes or 1 hour, quote, Quote, "In such, the Saudi government at one time started getting angry at all the accusations and why their integrity would be questioned like this. They were now changing the subject from Khashoggi's disappearance to playing an aggrieved victim of conspiracy theories. Then they started pointing fingers at Turkey, that maybe it was rogue elements in Turkey that killed Khashoggi. This made the higher up in Turkey angry. So, to quell all suspicions, they released the audio of Khashoggi's murder to the world. This was the transcript I showed earlier."
Announcements from Saudi Arabia cut against what Turkish investigators say happened inside this building. It all...
Unethical, but that's what they did. This kind of intelligence gathering is done all the time, and the only reason they might listen to the tapes again is if something sets them off, like the disappearance and death of a beloved journalist. They had to listen to review the tapes retrospectively and went through between 4,000 and 5,000 hours of material to find the key days and the 45 minutes that captured Khashoggi's last moment. But it was worth it. Turkey was vindicated, and the whole world now knew how callous Saudi Arabia was, something Khashoggi had spent the later part of his life telling us. The Saudi government finally changed its mind and admitted the truth that we all knew, but with a twist. According to their preliminary investigation, quote unquote, it showed that the journalist died in a fight, quote unquote, after refusing to go back to Saudi Arabia for some questioning. Of course, this report came with backlash, and then they changed it to the truth, at least a watered-down version of the truth. They came to the conclusion that Khashoggi was restrained against his will after a fight and then given a big dose of a drug, which caused him to overdose and die. Which is true, but they purposely left the part where he was suffocated with a plastic bag and dismembered. And of course, the plausible deniability that the Crown Prince did not know about such things? Well, by now, you all know that's a lie. That level of meticulous planning and resources carried out in a short period of time can't be done without someone in power giving approval. Even the Crown Prince's bodyguard was in the same room when the murder occurred. And it doesn't end there. 4 days later, after the killing, another group of Saudis showed up at the consulate and said they were there to find out what happened, but in reality, they were there to clean up. To add to this theory, investigators from Turkey were not allowed to visit the consulate for 2 weeks because of Saudi rules. By the time the Turkey investigators were allowed to enter the consulate to collect some evidence, there was nothing there. Not even DNA evidence of Mr. Khashoggi having been there. The only logical conclusion was that the place was thoroughly and forensically cleaned. That was the night the Turkish government told the news that Khashoggi had been killed in the Saudi consulate to absolve itself of all criticism. The Turkish government's plan was to let the local and foreign press know some of what they knew. Then, they let people from the CIA and a few other carefully chosen intelligence agencies like MI6 listen to the tapes, which proved that Saudi agents killed Khashoggi. It was said that the CIA decided there was medium to high certainty that Mohammed bin Salman had given the order to kill, and they had no doubts about it. 10 days into the uproar, King Salman of Saudi Arabia, who has been mainly absent since appointing his son to be his successor 16 months ago, sent one of his most reliable envoys, Mecca Governor Khaled al-Fazal, to Ankara to meet with President Erdogan. This move is widely perceived as the re-emergence of the sidelined old guard, called upon to clear up the mess left by the reckless Crown Prince. In January, the Saudi government finally put 11 people on trial in Riyadh for killing Khashoggi. Matrib and Dr. al-Tabaigi were among them, but Saud al-Qahtani, who is thought to have planned the murder, was not. He was only sacked, but that's just for the press. He hasn't been charged, or even asked to appear in court. He's still living well and large, like he was paid well for being a good soldier. Turkey has asked that the people involved be sent back to Istanbul to stand trial there, but Saudi Arabia said no. The Saudi government also refused to talk to Panorama, but they did say they condemned the abhorrent killing and would hold the people responsible. That's like saying, I am at fault, but no one can judge me, aside from me. The public prosecutor sought the death penalty for the 11 people on trial. Out of the 11, the court put 5 people to death in December 2019 for committing and directly participating in the murder of the victim, quote unquote. 3 more were given jail terms totaling 24 years for covering up this crime and breaking the law, quote unquote, but the other 3 were found not guilty. A few months after Khashoggi was killed, his son Salah spoke with Saudi Arabia's king and the crown prince. Salah Khashoggi, Khashoggi's son who lives in Saudi Arabia, tweeted, "We affirm our confidence in the Saudi judiciary at all levels, that it has been fair to us and that justice has been done." Salah Khashoggi also said that he and his brothers were pardoning those who killed our father, seeking reward from God Almighty, quote unquote. He agreed with the prosecution that the murder was not planned ahead of time. Which many people believed, he said, due to threats. After all, he and his brothers were given properties worth $4 million each. After 4 months, the Riyadh Criminal Court changed the death sentence of 5 of the defendants to 20 years in jail. The other 3 were given terms of 7 to 10 years. With this judgment, the prosecution said that the decisions were final and that the case was over. One person was not happy with this judgment. That was Hatice Cengiz. In her words, the Saudi authorities are closing the case without the world knowing the truth of who is responsible for Jamal's murder. She said, who planned it? Who gave the order? And where is his body? These are the most basic and important questions that have still not been answered.
أحب أن أؤكد أنه المواطن جمال غير موجود في القنصلية ولا في المملكة العربية السعودية، والقنصلية والسفارة تبذل جهودهم للبحث عنه، ونشعر حنا بقلق أزاء هذه القضية.
If you look at Saudi Arabia, they're an ally and they're a tremendous purchaser of not only military equipment, but other things. When I went there, they committed to purchase $450 billion worth of things.